We finally made it! The last original generation Ultraman TV show, and with it, Ultraman enters the 1980s. Though before getting too deep into this, perhaps to best appreciate what Ultraman 80 is, and to best understand what ultimately became of it and why, it might be worth exploring the environment which the show came out of. And for that, we have to go back to at least the 1970s. And so this is the story of the hero who came to us from a star. This is the story of Ultraman 80. The success of Kamen Rider and Return of Ultraman, which both debuted a day apart in the first week of April 1971, reignited the mainstream passion for Tokusatsu, or live-action Japanese special effects. It was a new wave in the medium's history, because, following the excitement of the first Tokusatsu boom between 1966 and 1968, interest in the medium cooled, but now Tokusatsu was back, and seemed bigger than it was before. And so, over the next few years, countless toys flew off shelves, trading cards found in snacks were in crazy high demand, and audiences, especially children, could not get enough of both theatrical and television monsters, heroes, and villains, those human-sized and larger-than-life alike. This was the second Tokusatsu boom, otherwise known as the second Kaiju boom, or the Henshin boom. But the Ultra series took a serious hit in 1974. Ultraman Leo, the latest entry of the series, struggled throughout its run. The show before it, 1973's Ultraman Tara, was insanely popular with children, and the darker nature of Leo did not sit well with the now predominantly younger demographic. Something an attempt to retool Leo into a lighter show and later back into a darker show did nothing to help. Furthermore, the mid-70s oil crisis left the special effects industry hurting for resources, severely impacting the productions of shows like Leo, and Leo's merchandise did not move as well as expected. When all was said and done, Ultraman Leo was labeled a failure, and with its studio, Tsuburaya Productions, unable to justify the cost of another expensive production, the Ultra series vanished from TV for years. Though that was just one piece in the larger collapse of Tokusatsu, what started a year before with the bankruptcy of Banzo, one of the boom's biggest sponsors and merchandise producers, all came to a head in 1975, when mainstream interest in Tokusatsu had subsided altogether, and virtually all the big names had gone under. Terror of Mechagodzilla, an infamous box office bomb, was the end of the first run of Godzilla films, and the disappointing ratings of Kamen Rider Stronger saw Kamen Rider disappear until the end of the decade. And while new films and shows continued to be made, next to none of it matched the impact of the output from years prior. However, thanks to a little anime movie only a few years later, everything would change. Released to Japanese cinemas on August 6, 1977, Space Battleship Yamato the movie set the box office aflame and sparked something of an anime boom that would take the animated medium to new heights, shifting the perception of anime from children's fare to something that can be taken seriously, and helping to establish fan culture as the mainstream force it is today. But these points will be returned to momentarily. More relevant to our immediate interest, Space Battleship Yamato the movie, a compilation of several episodes of the 1974 TV anime of the same name, inspired a science fiction craze that helped to spark a new appreciation for classic tokusatsu works. Children, of course, were a big part of the audience for tokusatsu, as they virtually always had been. But another significant portion of the audience were high schoolers and young adults. In other words, the children who grew up on the works of the first and second Tokusatsu booms, and, possibly as a reaction to the kid-centric direction that much of the latter boom was beholden to, they now sought more complicated science fiction stories from the art form. In the age before social media, these first and second generation Tokusatsu enthusiasts formed groups such as the Kaiju Club, where they talked, listened, watched, and wrote extensively about anything and everything Tokusatsu. Something loosely dramatized in the 2017 TV series, Kaiju Club. But I digress. Anyway, these fans have been hard at work since at least the end of the second boom, and hoped to demonstrate that Tokusatsu could be taken seriously as an art form. Many of their thoughts eventually found their way into magazines, which quickly spread throughout Japan, influencing attitudes towards the medium for ages to come. It was the mid-70s to early 80s when the original Godzilla film became recognized as a masterpiece of Japanese cinema, when Akiyoji Soji's Tokusatsu output earned its reputation as the cream of the crop, and when Ultra 7 arguably cemented itself as the crown jewel of the Ultra series. This was the third Tokusatsu boom. Although things started heating up again months earlier with the publication of magazines, like the January 1978 edition of Fantastic Collection, the new wave of interest in the Ultra series really got going with a successful rebroadcast of Ultra 7 in spring 1978. Despite its 0700 broadcasts on Saturday mornings, 7's rerun managed an average audience viewership of 12%, numbers that made it one of the biggest tokusatsu on TV at the time, and a big deal in general. The successful rebroadcast of Ultra 7 and other Ultra shows was capitalized on in a number of ways, namely with a big merchandise push for the series as a whole, and it didn't take long before the market was hit with no shortage of toys, guidebooks, soundtracks, and manga. The next big thing was a spring 1979 compilation film of several Akioji Soji episodes from the original Ultraman TV series. Said film was double billed with the now infamous The Six Ultra Brothers vs. the Monster Army, a 1974 international co-production with Chayo Productions. The good business these films did, on top of the warm reception of the previous endeavors, emboldened Tsuburaya Productions to take even bigger steps, and that next step was not only a new production, but a change in mediums. Throughout the 70s, anime had been gradually displacing tokusatsu as the dominant force in entertainment, and its popularity was only taken to new heights with the previously mentioned space battleship Yamato. The 1977 box office smash, along with spawning a huge following, was the first time an anime film reached the top 10 highest-grossing films of the year, and its performance opened the door for others to follow. 1978 saw the release of the Yamato sequel, Farewell to Space Battleship Yamato, as well as Lupin III, The Mystery of Mamo. Then in 1979 there was the Galaxy Express 999 film. Television anime was given a boost too. And, in another example of Yamato inspiring a science fiction boom, classic sci-fi anime like Astro Boy, Tetsujin 28, and Cyborg 009 received new adaptations within a year of each other. So, in that environment, Tsuburaya Productions knew what they had to do. Joining forces with Sunrise Animation, the studio behind Mobile Suit Gundam, they unleashed the first anime adaptation of Ultraman with The Ultraman and Mobile Suit Gundam aired together, debuting only 2 days apart in April 1979, and after Gundam's cancellation due to low ratings, some of its staff, including series creator Yoshiyuki Tomino, were transferred over to help with the Ultraman. The anime spin on the classic Tokusatsu series, which enjoyed viewership twice as high as Gundam's initial run, was a hit for both companies. Of course, Gundam would go on to completely overshadow the Ultraman in the long run, but that's a story for another time. The success of the Ultraman put Tsuburaya Productions in a healthier position, and with the newfound financial freedom it afforded them, the studio elected to pursue another live-action show. It seemed to make perfect sense. Demand for Ultraman was high, and while the anime was a cool experiment, plenty of fans were curious about how a modern live-action show would look, and so Tsuburaya decided to deliver. But Ultraman's new decade return to form, at least at first, was to be unlike anything the Ultra series had done before. Ultraman 80 was a major step forward for the series, and it deserves that credit for at least a few different reasons. One of the most obvious reasons was that the show represented a noteworthy upgrade in the special effects department. Despite not having actively touched Ultraman in years, Tsuburaya Productions had still been in the business of making special effects shows. Those included the Dinosaur Trilogy and Starwolf, work which allowed their technical magicians to refine their abilities, even while away from their greatest claim to fame. But another significant matter happened during Ultraman's absence. The film didn't reach Japanese shores until June 30th, 1978, over a year after its US release, yet like just about everywhere else in the world, Star Wars was a huge deal in Japan. It, and to a lesser extent, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, revolutionized special effects, and a lot of what had been done in the past now seemed quaint by comparison. And it wasn't just Hollywood that the tokusatsu industry had to be concerned with. There had been almost a decade of anime such as Mazinger Z and Science Ninja Team Gatchaman doing virtually everything tokusatsu could do for less money and arguably better. So, determined not to be left behind, Tsuburaya Productions gave Ultraman 80 their all. The man most responsible for seeing this through was Koichi Takano, a Tsuburaya Productions veteran whose relationship with company founder and special effects legend Eiji Tsuburaya dates back to 1955's Godzilla Raids Again. At the time an assistant cameraman, Takano was the guy who accidentally put the camera on the setting that resulted in the frenetic action between Godzilla and Anguirus in the aforementioned film. Although this was something he thought would get him fired, special effects director Tsuburaya liked the effect, and it was the beginning of a relationship that led to Takano basically becoming the primary special effects director of the Ultra series in 1966. Ultraman 80 is his last outing as the primary figure in this position, and he saved his best for last, delivering visual spectacle that must be seen to be believed. With a mere glance, it should be apparent that Ultraman had come a long way since the 1960s. Take a look back at the first episode of the original Ultraman, or even something as late as the first episode of Ultraman Ace from 1972. There you will find less convincing camera work, or, a little more often than preferred, exposure of barren set floors in the middle of what is supposed to be urban environments, something known to Japanese fans as the Ultraman Plaza. However, with Ultraman 80, less flattering imagery has been replaced by fairly consistent low-angle photography, and forced perspectives committed to making their subjects look like giants. There's a greater emphasis on keeping foregrounds as interesting as possible, the miniature is more detailed than before, and regular effort to keep the camera in motion. All of this footage comes from the first episode alone. Thing is, production images reveal the set floor to be as barren as the one featured in the first episode of Ultraman Ace. Yet the inspired use of the camera allows the filmmakers to minimize, and at times completely avoid, the shortcomings of earlier shows. Additionally, Ultraman 80 has more composite imagery than its predecessors, and it rivals the quality found in the contemporary theatrical features of its art form. Same goes for the polish in the optical effects department, where beams light up like never before. Lastly, the show boasts some of the greatest fights the series has seen up to that point. Stylized, well-shot action with a hefty dose of acrobatics, all contained within pleasantly compact battles. The visual splendor is paired with an equally incredible soundscape that includes an exceptional main theme which excels in all of its forms, and the exaggerated sound effects that accompany the combat and monsters. Episode 12's battle might be the finest example of how 80 can excel in the audio department, in the way in which the music and sound effects complements the fighting and editing, there appearing to be more of an intention and rhythm to their use. The things on display here are pretty comparable to what special effects director Shinji Higuchi would do in the acclaimed Gamera films roughly 15 years later. In fact, during an interview featured in The Dawn of Heisei, Higuchi credited Ultraman 80 as one of the works his achievements on Gamera were a rehash of. That's not to say the previous Ultra shows didn't shine in one way or another. Return of Ultraman made remarkable use of sunsets, and Ultraman Taro is a tight second, if not an equal or outright better at times, in the framing of its fights. But it would be fair to say that none of the previous shows were as consistent and polished across the board as Ultraman 80. Still, with all of that said, the stellar spectacle isn't what made Ultraman 80 special. So, what did? At first, following the longest time the series had been off air at that point, Tsuburaya Productions sought to return to business as usual. But what was business as usual? The Ultra series started in January 1966 with Ultra Q, a show which followed a group of characters who investigate the supernatural, and said mysteries usually involved giant monsters in some capacity. Although an enormous hit that led to the first Tokusatsu boom, it was its spiritual successor later that year, which proved a far bigger success, and established the series as we know it today. Ultraman. Ultraman can be summed up with the following. A red and silver alien hero either possesses a fallen human or disguises himself as a human in order to work alongside and help a defense team protect the world from aliens or giant monsters, and, when all else fails, transforms to do battle with the latest baddie. Some shows lean more towards sci-fi and others superhero or fantasy, yet every show more or less stuck to that formula. Defense team-oriented stories about the heroes solving the latest mystery, except for Ultra Fight. That was a little different. Apparently, in approaching their latest project, Tsuburaya Productions saw little need to rock the boat. In all fairness, they came to the table with a polished take on old ideas. For example, there is more of an effort to present a convincing worldview surrounding what had been one of the fundamental components of the Ultra series, the defense team. UGM, the monster attack team of Ultraman 80, is the most well-realized defense team since Ultra 7's Ultra Guard, if not better. More effort is made to showcase the personnel, facilities, and operations expected of a large-scale military organization, especially one that does battle against giant monsters on a regular basis. Small touches like control towers, runways, and ground crew go a long way towards selling this slice of special effects fantasy as reality, and helping Ultraman 80 avoid the organization operated by a handful of people trap these shows have a tendency to fall into. Plus the ride mecha and the action involving them are as good as ever. Yeah, there is quite a lot to be praised here. Still, even with all the thoughtfulness on this front, it was decided Defense Force business should take a backseat to something else.
子愛する親や弟を思うわね。あの明かりの一つ一つにいろんな人間、いろんな愛や喜び、悲しみがあるんですね。
あの明かりの下の一つ一つの生活を守る。それが我々 UGM の使命なんだよ。はい。
Ultraman 80 would be the story about those lights, or more accurately, the people behind them. Although the popularity of the art form seemed to be recovering, the days when just another Tokusatsu TV program was enough had long been over, and so the show sponsor, TBS, short for Tokyo Broadcasting System, intervened. TBS wanted to know what would be the point in reviving Ultraman now, and without anything to distinguish an 80s revival of Ultraman from what came before, they were hesitant about supporting a new live-action show. But not content with just waiting around, they took matters into their own hands and played a very active role in shaping what Ultraman 80 would become. TBS was behind selecting Hasunori Hasegawa as the lead actor, behind picking Noriaki Yuasa, the director of nearly all the early Gamera films, as one of the primary directors, and, most importantly, behind the decision to make Ultraman a teacher. According to director Yuasa, Tsuburaya Productions just wanted to remake the original Ultraman television series, but TBS wanted to produce something a little different. That's why Ultraman was made a school teacher. That presented him with the problem of not being able to turn into Ultraman in front of his students. A Ultraman series revolving around children was something Tsuburaya Productions had half-heartedly toyed with since at least Return of Ultraman, and something they were especially eager to pursue in the immediate aftermath of Ultraman Leo. One of the main priorities was to expand storytelling opportunities by getting Ultraman away from defense teams. Other ideas considered that eventually found their way into the next live-action show included a focus on the hero instilling good values into troubled youth, and the show having a school setting. Still, Tsuburaya Productions couldn't quite figure out how to make these ideas work, and thus settled on returning to basics. But with TBS's recommendation to make Ultraman a schoolteacher, they found their missing ingredient, and the path for the new show was set. However, there was one final piece to the puzzle in determining the direction Ultraman 80 went: the juvenile delinquency epidemic. As reflected in contemporary media, such as the popular rugby TV series School Wars and Yankee School series Bebop High School, and as extensively covered on primetime news and NHK documentaries, the late 70s and 80s was a rough period for Japanese schools, namely junior high and high school. Kids ran away from home and ditched classes. They dabbled heavily with smoking, drinking, sex, and drugs. Biker gangs roamed the streets. Teachers were targets of violence. Bullying and suicide were at an all-time high, while petty crimes like shoplifting and bicycle theft were a common occurrence. In times so uncertain, with regular reports of students shoving each other off buildings or strangling one another, it was thought valuable to explore life, love, and courage, and do it in a way relatable to the people who needed it the most. So, Ultraman 80 would still feature a defense team, and the hero would still be on it. However, at least at first, it would not be the focus of the show. Instead, the lead character would be a school teacher committed to helping his students navigate the tumultuous days of their youth. School drama was a new direction for the Ultra series, but not new for television as a whole. Ultraman 80, which debuted on April 2nd, 1980, followed in the wake of very popular classroom dramas such as Netchu Jidai in October 1978 and Kenpachi Sensei in October 1979. And like other classroom dramas, Ultraman 80 would be conscious of the social climate it existed within. That translates to an amusing comment pertaining to the 1979 oil and energy crisis.
体育の時間でもないのに、なんでかけなきゃならないんですか？世の中省エネ省エネでやかましいのにさ。腹減った。
and a potential reflection of the latest wave of women's rights activism that had blossomed since the last live-action Ultra series productions. 9 years earlier in Return of Ultraman, lead character Go, before obtaining his powers or joining MAT, the defense team of his show, tells the sole female member of MAT she cannot rescue a child because she is a woman. That on top of his knack for hitting women and children. And in Ultraman Leo, a jaded Dan Moriboshi drops this gem. But come the end of the decade, trailblazers like the Year 24 group had for years been pushing boundaries in manga with the touchy material they addressed, like gender and sexuality, and challenging the androcentrism of Japanese media. Also, support from female consumers was becoming an ever-growing force to be reckoned with. For instance, females were essential towards the early success of Mobile Suit Gundam, and the development of the doujinshi market in the early 80s. So, in Ultraman 80, a female gym teacher shuts down detractors who suggest she can't teach gym because she's a woman. Ultraman gets judo thrown by a grade school girl, and, along with featuring more female characters than ever, Imi Juno and Ryoko Hoshi are among the most prominent women of the early Ultra shows. Ryoko also doubles as Yulian, a female Ultra, and ally to 80, while she's the third example of such in the series. Following Mother of Ultra from Ultraman Taro and Amiya from the animated show, Ryoko was the first to be a regular character, at least in one form or another. Those are just a few examples of how Ultraman had updated itself for the new world. But again, what really set Ultraman 80 apart was adding elements of classroom dramas, like making Ultraman himself a schoolteacher. These were refreshing moves for a series that had appealed to children as long as the Ultra series had been by that point, and a lot of heartwarming drama comes out of the decision. Arguably, it's the most significant shakeup to the live-action Ultra formula since Return of Ultraman giving its lead a life outside of defense team responsibilities. And, as hopefully will be illustrated, these school days would end up becoming one of the most instrumental elements of both the show's identity and its ultimate performance. 5 years have passed since a monster attack, and, within that time, humanity has become complacent, many believing such creatures to be a thing of the distant past, even to the point of scoffing at the idea of one. Although set in the same universe as the rest of the early live-action Ultraman shows, there are not any immediate overt connections to a larger continuity, and that ambiguity gives Ultraman 80 a unique sense of freedom. Basically, it's almost a loose reboot, making it more newcomer-friendly than any show since Return of Ultraman, and meaning that it taking place only several years after the catastrophic events of Ultraman Leo is less of a problem. Anyway, the darkness of the human heart, referred to as minus energy, has spawned a new breed of monster ready to shatter the peace of Earth, and perhaps the most famous example of the new wave monsters is Ho, the manifestation of a teenage boy's frustration and despair about being heartlessly dumped by his girlfriend for another guy. These ideas, the school setting and the minus energy concept, complement each other nicely. Youth, a time when emotions run wild, provides fertile breeding ground for monsters like Ho. So, hoping to preempt and contain this, Ultraman 80, taking the form of junior high school teacher Takeshi Yamato, has come to Earth in an effort to guide humanity down the right path with education. Not only does the opening song tell us he is the man who came from a distant star to teach us about love and courage, but Takeshi gives us his pitch early in episode 1 as well.
見てください。この子供たちを。このまま育てば怪獣になってしまうような子供もいるんです。僕は怪獣の生まれてくる根本を叩き潰したいんです。僕は怪獣と戦うのと同じような気持ちで先生になったんです。なるほど。新米の先生だからまだなってないんですけど、でも今にきっと生徒たちから信用され、必要とされる先生になるつもりなんです。そう。頑張ってください。
While Yamato approaches the challenge with a smile and a twinkle in his eye, the kids do not accept him with open arms. They mock him and even attempt to get him fired. His earnest nature does not mesh well with the adolescents, and dealing with them proves a little more troublesome than he bargained for. In all fairness, Yamato's initial efforts are clumsy and naive. In-universe, it can be viewed as a byproduct of him being an alien, and thus still adjusting to the customs of his new environment. But, out of universe, actor Hatsunori and the writers intentionally made a clumsy character and counterbalanced that trait with a hardworking nature and kind heart, apparently meant to serve as a deliberate sharp contrast to the cool sharp guy image valued by the youth culture of the time. This makes Yamato less of a fully formed hero, such as the original Ultraman protagonist, Hayata and Dan, and more like the complicated characters Go and Gen, characters who have to evolve and grow. And it makes sense. On top of him being a new teacher, one thing that might be easily overlooked or forgotten is that teaching or mentorship is often a two-way street. Learning should be a lifelong process, and it is important to keep an open mind as one encounters new information or experiences. That said, being an effective teacher isn't always, if ever, easy. Often, teachers are not fairly compensated for the effort actually required to do their job well. Dealing with potentially 24 hormonal grade schoolers and preparing them to be the future is no small feat, and that's before taking hours and pay into account. So Yamato has his work cut out for him, and these kids put him through the ringer. Still, although he has to change his approach and learn lessons of his own as he does, Yamato weathers the storm and wins his students over. The tensions of their early interactions give way to them worrying about him in his absence, and trying to secure him a date with a coworker. In short, a bond is formed that not even the power of fourth-dimensional space can overcome.
先生が一番乗りだよ。
まだ誰も教室に入ってないんですから。
君たち。
さあ先生、教室入りましょう。先生。
よし。みんな待っててくれたんだ。ありがとう。ありがとうな。ありがとう。
Yamato is a patient and helpful figure at a time when these kids need it most. Their journey from childhood to adulthood, he bounces back and forth as necessary from a firm authority figure who provides structure, to a sympathetic listening ear and friend as he teaches them how to face heartbreak and rejection, whether that be romantic or otherwise, how to endure failure or disadvantages, because failure comes to all, and sometimes some people have it harder than others. But neither should be an excuse to quit or abandon responsibilities, and Yamato advocates a certain level of freedom, arguing that, while the level of freedom is conditional, kids need space to enjoy and discover themselves.
家庭内暴力とか非行とか、これは一つには子供の時代を子供らしく正常に育てない結果なんです。子供の成長とともに自然に芽生えるものを無理やり積んでしまった結果です。お母さん、ひろし君は少年らしく男らしく成長してるんです。安心してください。
This can all be viewed as a reminder teachers can have more to offer children than reading, writing, and arithmetic. A good teacher can mean more than the world in one's formative years. And fortunately, the kids of Sakuragaoka Junior High School are blessed with a phenomenal science teacher, and that's not because he's a hero from a star. No, the most important things he does for them doesn't require superpowers at all. So, despite the stellar visuals and action, what truly gave Ultraman 80 its identity was the school setting and heartfelt drama which offered lessons applicable beyond the confines of middle school, and this made matters all the more unfortunate when those elements were axed. There are at least a few different reasons for the loss of the school setting. Let's start with the internal factors. Members of Ultraman 80's staff were annoyed about dealing with the logistics of working with students and filming in an actual school. Furthermore, some of the writers were concerned that the school drama focus would narrow the scope of the show, and found it difficult to balance with UGM matters. The growing displeasure among the staff with the subject matter coincided with the exit of TBS producer Yoji Hashimoto. Hashimoto originally spearheaded the school setting, and was its biggest proponent. However, during the show's production, he was transferred to the radio department, leaving no one to fight for it. In addition to internal struggles, there also appears to have been a significant level of viewer discontent. Some found the school setting to be too much of a change for the series, and accused the show of trend chasing. Fans of the Sunrise anime were disappointed by what felt like a tame setting relative to the fantastical animated space opera they enjoyed just a year before. Finally, it seems being topical came back to bite the show. Naturally, in the midst of the unprecedented social crisis concerning Japanese schools, attempts to assign blame for children's behavior started, and before long fingers were being pointed at entertainment. It would seem that Ultraman 80, with its title character fighting monsters on a weekly basis, and much of its runtime spent within a classroom, found itself a primary target of harsh attacks by the PTA, or Parent-Teacher Association. They thought it outrageous that a teacher would also be a member of a defense team and Ultraman, and considered the show as a whole harmful for children, even citing the number of times Ultraman was hit and hit back. And so, as a result of staff annoyance, Hashimoto's absence, perceived viewer discontent, and possibly an effort to distance the show from the culture war it found itself a part of, the school drama was dropped after episode 12, a move done with no fanfare explanations, or goodbyes. Just an abrupt switch back to a business as usual Ultra Series show, and it was a move from which Ultraman 80 would never recover. With Yamato's daytime profession gone, also gone are all the characters associated with it. From the select students we get to know and love, to the principal and vice principal. The only mention of the school arc past episode 12 is Yamato mistaking a UGM employee as Nanchan, a former school coworker. However, she quickly corrects his mistake.
君
は？
やっぱりのんちゃん。
私地球防衛軍気象班のキャスター小坂百合子ですけど。
そうですか。ゆりちゃん。
今日の天気は曇りのち晴れ。頑張ってください。
はあ、世の中には似た人がいるもんだな。
A little inside joke to acknowledge these characters share the same actress. Anyway, the removal of the school's setting saw an almost instant and sharp drop in viewership, and will be the start of extensive experimentation as the show tried to find its way again. First, in what was likely a bid to emulate Ultra 7, the immediate post-school drama phase of Ultraman 80 pushes UGM and sci-fi elements to the forefront. Similarities include increasing the defense team membership to 7, with 80 as the 7th member, making Yamato and Emmy something akin to its own Dan and Ann, and basically remaking episodes of Ultra 7, albeit with happier endings. The order to destroy the stray star recalls Super Weapon R1. When the planets align, something will happen, evokes Ambassador of the Non-Malt, and the beautiful Challenger echoes Glory for Whom, to name only a few examples. While this phase is generally at its best, when following in the footsteps of Ultra 7, it hardly compares to what came before, whether that be Ultra 7 or its own school arc. When this direction harmed and failed to restore viewership, legacy characters like Baltan, Red King, and Gamora were brought back, and connections to greater Ultra mythology were incorporated. When even that didn't work, and what was likely an attempt to recapture the show's earlier vibe without returning to the school setting, Children of the Week were introduced for Yamato to help. This phase is reminiscent of Ultraman Taro, though never really matches that show's quality or style. In what was likely another effort to shake things up, as early on directing responsibilities had been passed back and forth between Noriaki Yuasa and Tsuburaya veteran Kiyozumi Fukasawa, new directors were brought in. They included Joe Hirose, a director of youth dramas, Samaji no Nagase, a Toho veteran who wrote for some of the earlier Ultra shows, and Toru Toyama, an action director for studios Daiei and Senko Sasha. Ultimately, the show went through so many changes that by the end, it's almost an entirely different experience. New opening, different characters, and so on. Yet nothing reversed the show's fortunes. Ultraman 80 started with strong ratings comparable to the Ultraman, but with the loss of its school focus following episode 12, the show lost roughly half of its audience. To make matters worse, along with the falling audience figures, the merchandise collected dust on store shelves, and before long, bad blood boiled between Tsuburaya Productions and TBS, something that would sour relations between the two companies for years to come. Unfortunately for Ultraman 80 and its retooling, the transition from the late 70s into the early 80s was accompanied by what appears to have been a significant evolution in creative output and audience tastes. Everything from music, with the rise of idols, to media consumption, with the advent of VHS. There had been nostalgia for Ultraman and other classic Tokusatsu properties in the years leading up to 80, though perhaps this nostalgia, in addition to being short-lived, was misunderstood. Other Ultra shows had been rebroadcast in the late 70s, though Ultra 7 and the Ultraman seem to have made the strongest impressions. Ultra 7 boasted a level of writing sophistication it alone consistently offered, and the Sunrise anime, in addition to attracting fans of animation, better met the demands inspired by Star Wars and Space Battleship Yamato. By the time we get into the new decade, it would appear most people had their fill of old-school Tokusatsu and had moved on. Ultraman 80 losing what made it most distinct, Yamato's triple identity, UGM member, teacher, and Ultraman. The conflict that stemmed from juggling those identities, and the dynamic he shared with his students, was a costly blow that left the show, more often than not, feeling like a tired retread of earlier shows. And its special effects, while impressive even today, weren't enough to carry the show alone. Bringing state-of-the-art special effects to TV, spectacle which had once been exclusive to film, played a huge role in making the Ultra series the groundbreaking franchise it was in the mid-60s and early 70s. Something which benefited from the novelty and popularity of TV at the time. But come 1980, Hollywood had changed the effects game with hits like Superman, making audiences believe a man could fly, and it seems Tokusatsu needed a lot more to compete. Things weren't any easier at home either. Thanks to the momentum started by Space Battleship Yamato the movie, anime and manga eclipsed Tokusatsu. Just to provide a taste of what was happening at the time, adaptations of classical children's literature such as Anne of Green Gables reached the height of their popularity. Gag series Dr. Slump and the 1979 version of the sci-fi fantasy series Doraemon claimed the hearts of children. Women and girls enthusiastically embraced boys' love like Kazatoki no Uta, as well as the newly invigorated shoujo genre with hits like The Rose of Versailles and Aim for the Ace. The slapstick rom-com Urusei Yatsura bolstered the flame of the growing otaku movement, while modern mecha stories like Super Dimension Fortress Macross and Mobile Suit Gundam became standards of their genre for the decade. A directionless, old-fashioned Ultraman 80 was overwhelmed by a wave of fierce new competition and was something that satisfied few people, which in retrospect could be viewed as a sign Tokusatsu was again, already, on its way out. Ultraman 80 didn't suffer alone. That late 70s wave of renewed interest in Tokusatsu led to all of the big-name old-school properties, like Kamen Rider, Gamera, and Godzilla getting revived in some capacity, and virtually all of those revivals were limited successes, if not simply outright failures. But some good came out of this era as well, in spite of the troubles experienced by the latest productions. The art form would find success in merchandise lines like Bandai's Ultra Monster series, and a very active fan community, out of which came 1. Projects like Daikon Films' Return of Ultraman, a fan film from the kids who would eventually become Studio Gainax. 2. A number of significant festivals such as the first Amateur Union Tokusatsu Tournament. And 3. is where future industry figures like Shinji Higuchi, possibly the biggest name in modern kaiju cinema, Shusuke Kaneko, lead figure of Gamera's 90s reinvention, and Hideaki Anno, the man behind Neon Genesis Evangelion, would get their start. However, this all only prolonged the inevitable. Come 1984, with the failure of Kamen Rider Z-Cross and the disappointing performance of The Return of Godzilla, things reached their breaking point. The Return of Godzilla is a little complicated. The expensive semi-reboot meant to get the series back to its roots was both profitable and the second highest grossing Japanese film of its year, but the film didn't make the money expected of it, in addition to receiving lukewarm responses from audiences and critics alike. Mainstream perception appeared to be that Godzilla, if not the medium as a whole, was passé. And with this, the third Tokusatsu boom is generally considered to have come to a close, leaving most of the decade to new Toei properties, a story for another time. In short, the Tokusatsu icons of old failed to compete with the novelty and wonder offered by the new Hollywood effects features and the latest and greatest anime had to offer. It would seem Ultraman 80 and its peers played things too safe, and thus fell to the changing tides, starting a bitter winter that would take the art form well over a decade to recover from as a whole. If nothing else, Ultraman 80 did well enough to avoid cancellation, but it did not do well enough for TBS to continue supporting the Ultra series as it had. So, despite the course correction efforts, Ultraman 80 in the end was deemed a failure. And with 2 back-to-back failures in the live-action realm, no one was eager to touch Ultraman or Tsuburaya Productions. Still, Tsuburaya didn't abandon the series. They would make various efforts over the rest of the decade and beyond to keep it going. It struggled in its traditional format, film and television, yet it lived on as a licensing juggernaut and enjoyed a healthy life as video games, toys, mascots to slap on everyday products. And eventually, 15 years after the end of Ultraman 80, the series would see a proper revival, a return to primetime television with Ultraman Tiga. And, although it took a little longer, even Ultraman 80 would get a second chance at life. In the early 2000s, Tsuburaya Productions again found itself in troubled waters. This time it was facing bankruptcy, and things looked grim, more than ever before. This brought about from years of company mismanagement, in addition to Tokusatsu once again falling out of favor, and once again in the face of anime and Hollywood effects, this time CGI. Recognizing that the end was near, at least as the company had existed until then, Tsuburaya Productions decided to go out on a high note, that being Ultraman Mebius in 2006. Ultraman Mebius would return to the old-school timeline and celebrate the earliest entries of the Ultra series, Ultra Q from 1966 to Ultraman 80 from 1980, and in doing so, the new show would revisit past storylines and bring back familiar faces, human, alien, and kaiju alike. When it came time to revisit Ultraman 80, what the show had to do was obvious. It had to right the wrongs of the past. Hiroyasu Shibuya, primary producer of the Ultra series at the time, reached out to Hatsunori Hasegawa to apologize for how the school drama was treated decades earlier, and to ask him to return to give Ultraman 80 the closure it deserved. Hasegawa, whose fondest memories of Ultraman 80 involved his character comforting broken-hearted students after they experienced a breakup, or forming a band and rocking out to the latest tunes with them, was more than happy to reprise his role, which would be his first return to the series since the end of Ultraman 80. The result was nothing short of an incredible send-off to the material, and it all begins with a beautiful callback.
って歩けよ。俺なんかさ、一人で地球を持ち上げてるって気持ちでいるんだぞ。お、見てみろ。よし、股の間から俺を見てみろ。地球を持ち上げてるように見えるだろ。地球を背負って立つ。重いな、実に重い。
こうしてると地球を支えている気分になるんだ。地球を背負って立つ。先生も登校拒否したことあってな。
先生も？
ああ、その時迎えに来てくれた先生がこうして教えてくれたんだ。
Decades have passed since the events of Ultraman 80, just as they had in real life, and a certain school was now set for decommission. We learned that Yamato's disappearance was just as sudden for his students as the school drama was for Ultraman 80 as a show. The alumni decide to hold a reunion before the school's demolition, and during the reunion, minus energy levels suddenly spike. Ho has returned. But there's a twist. The school itself is responsible for the revival of the monster, though it was only a means to orchestrate a reunion between Yamato and his former students. Uninterested in a fight, Ho allows itself to be destroyed once 80 arrives, and with that matter resolved, 80 is met by the sight of his former students on the school rooftop, and the appreciation they express for him.
先生に憧れて僕は教師になりました。
私は結婚して3人の子供のお母さんです。
僕は地元の信用金庫に就職しました。大学で研究する日々を送ってます。親父のスーパーついで頑張ってるぜ。
Over a quarter of a century earlier, Yamato left without a goodbye because he believed himself to be a failure and decided to devote himself completely to dealing with monsters as they spring up. He had originally hoped to lead humanity to a brighter tomorrow and prevent a new wave of monsters through the power of education. As far as those goals are concerned, he did fail, but he also failed to see the good he did do, how he changed the lives of those he taught. His cheery demeanor and willingness to go beyond the bare minimum of what was expected of him left an immeasurable impact on his students. It's a demonstration that while a single teacher, even a superhuman one, might not accomplish something as grandiose as change the whole world, what they can do for individual lives can mean the world and ripple through time. The callback that the tribute episode starts with is one such ripple. Skamoto, former student turned teacher, does for his troubled student what Yamato did for him over 2 decades earlier. A small act of kindness that wasn't appreciated in the moment proved an invaluable gesture, meaningful across generations. Ultraman 80 had already shown that being taught isn't always easy. Adolescence, an unstable period filled with raging hormones, and an identity crisis and rebellion or two, only makes matters so much more difficult, and that's without getting into the many other potential related factors. So anyone able to help make those growing pains a little easier is something of a godsend. So, even with the relatively short amount of time he was in their lives, Yamato guiding them, reassuring them, and giving them the space they needed to figure themselves out, meant more to them than he remotely realized at the time, and he comes to learn they meant more to him than he realized. Summarized here, where Yamato shares what he has learned from all of it.
感謝してるのは私の方だ。彼らと共に過ごせた時間は私にとってもかけがえのない思い出だからな。
さあ、みんなが待っています。
メビウス、私は自分の言葉で謝ってみるよ。大切な私の生徒たちだから。
Although belated, this is the true conclusion of Ultraman 80. Focus on and closure for what mattered most. That wasn't the impressive special effects work, nor its defense team and the battles it waged against fantastic larger-than-life forces. No, the Legacy episode returned to the roots of Ultraman 80, and brought back some of the most cherished of its lost elements, minus energy, and the school setting, and the students of that setting, and in doing so, produced something special. That said, this episode cannot undo the troubled direction that followed the drop of the school arc, and thus only does so much to redeem Ultraman 80 as a show. What happened happened, though it is probably the next best thing. An episode filled with former students reminiscing about bygone days, who they were as kids contrasted with where they are as adults, and a teacher who comes to realize the value his efforts had, all topped off with a beautiful class reunion. It's remarkably touching, and works even without having seen Ultraman 80, evoking the sentiment of a quote often attributed to Dr. Seuss, that being, sometimes you will never know the value of a moment until it becomes a memory. Ultraman 80 had a promising start, and its initial conceit had so much more to offer, so much more it could have explored. With its signature Ultra series blend of sci-fi, fantasy, and live action, it had potential to reach its audience in a way nothing else could. Though caught in a period of immense change, in addition to the controversies surrounding its subject matter, Ultraman 80 found itself in troubled waters, and the attempts to navigate those challenges led to the loss of some of its most essential elements. Perhaps had it weathered the storm, Ultraman 80 might have ushered in a completely new and glorious age for its series. Instead, the decisions actually made cost the show both its relevance and its quality. That's not to suggest the post-school arc episodes don't at times have their charms. Still, the show spent most of its run, often less effectively, revisiting territory covered in previous shows at a time when the series desperately needed to do new things, and to do those things well. That it never fully took advantage of what it had initially promised didn't help matters either. Fortunately, the school drama, so unceremoniously dropped after 12 episodes, was revisited decades later in episode 41 of Ultraman Mebius, an episode that provided closure and a valuable new perspective on a lot of what Ultraman 80 was covering years earlier. The impact teachers can have on the lives of their students, and students on their teachers, all packaged in an immensely moving drama that works without having seen the original show. And that is the story of Ultraman 80. First and foremost, a special thanks to my patrons: Austin Trench, Nick Lenz, Eric Gonzalez, Puppy Buds, Brandon DeReal, Monkey Pant, Academic Type, Michael Stevens, and a big thanks to Zealous Fervor. You all are the best, and I could not do this without you. Thank you very much for your support. And for everyone, what did you think of Ultraman 80? What was your favorite arc, your favorite fight, favorite episode, or who was your favorite character or monster? And which Ultra-related subject should be covered next? Should it be Tiga? What about the show airing now, Ultraman Blazar? Or maybe one of the anime? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, if you want to see more videos like this, consider giving this video a thumbs up or subbing to the channel. But that's all for now. Until next time, take care.